The vote comes back 300 to 12 against us. I stand alone in the center of the Galactic Council chamber, a circular room built for giants, and I feel every one of those 300 votes land on my chest like a stone. My name is Elena Voss. I am the first and only ambassador Earth has ever sent beyond its own solar system, and in this moment, under 1,000 alien eyes, I am also the last hope my planet has of avoiding disaster. The delegate from the Threll Assembly does not even wait for the official announcement. He laughs. It is a strange clicking sound that echoes off the high domed ceiling, and within seconds, a dozen other delegates join him. Some of them are laughing with their whole bodies, tentacles and wings and strange jointed limbs shaking with amusement. I do not understand all of their languages, but I do not need translation software to understand mockery. It sounds the same in every corner of the galaxy. 3 weeks ago, our astronomers detected something impossible. A cluster of debris, moving faster than anything natural should move, tearing through the outer edge of our solar system on a course that will bring it directly through Earth's orbital path within the year. Our best scientists studied it for 6 days straight without sleep. They agreed on one thing. Whatever it is, we do not have the technology to stop it, deflect it, or even fully understand it. It could be a rogue asteroid cluster shaped by ancient gravitational forces. It could be something else entirely, something built. So we did what any young, frightened, hopeful species would do. We asked for help. I stand in front of the council with a data crystal in my hand, carrying every calculation, every warning, every plea my people could put into words. I ask them for shared defense technology, for access to their deflection arrays, for anything that might give 6 billion people on a small blue planet a fighting chance. The delegate from the Threll Assembly rises from his seat. His name is Vorlath, and I have learned in 3 years of diplomatic meetings that he finds humans endlessly entertaining, the way a person might find a struggling insect entertaining before stepping on it out of boredom. Ambassador Voss, he says, and his translator renders his voice smooth and almost gentle, which makes the words worse. Your species has existed as a spacefaring civilization for what? 40 of your years? You still resolve disagreements between your own nations with violence. You have not even achieved unified government on your own world, and you ask this council, representing 4,000 years of galactic cooperation, to divert resources meant for established civilizations, to protect a species that cannot protect itself from itself. Laughter again. Louder this time. I feel my hands tighten around the data crystal. I think of my brother, who works in a fishing village on the coast of a country I will not name, because his home does not matter here. His life does not matter here. Not to these voices. I think of every parent on Earth who has no idea this meeting is happening, who has no idea their entire species' fate might be decided by a room full of amused strangers. With respect, I say, and I make sure my voice does not shake, our history of conflict does not disqualify us from asking for help. It should not be used as evidence that we deserve to face this threat alone. 100 ended. The delegate from the Ophir Collective, a quiet and normally reasonable species, speaks next, and for a moment I feel a flicker of hope, but her words crush it just as quickly. The Council understands your fear, Ambassador, but precedent must be considered. If we intervene for every young species facing a natural threat, we set an expectation we cannot sustain. Perhaps this event will encourage your people toward the unity and technological maturity the Council requires before further engagement. In other words, survive this on your own, and maybe we will respect you afterward, if there is an afterward. The final vote is called. I watch the tally rise on the massive display above the Council floor. 300 against, 12 in favor. I do not know most of the 12, but I notice one delegate, small and quiet, seated near the back, who does not laugh with the others. A being with pale blue skin and calm, watchful eyes, wearing the deep green robes of the Ilvanar species. I do not know her name yet. I will learn it soon enough, and it will matter more than I can imagine right now. The council chair, a towering figure from a species I have never learned to pronounce correctly, closes the session with a final statement that I will remember for the rest of my life. Earth's petition is denied. This council recommends the human species use this event as an opportunity for internal growth and unification. Session adjourned. Just like that, it is over. My people have 30 seconds of official record, and then the council moves on to the next matter on their agenda. Something about trade tariffs between two systems I have never heard of. We do not even get an hour. We get 30 seconds, and then laughter, and then silence. I walk out of the chamber with my head high, because that is what an ambassador does, even when her hands are shaking and her chest feels like it has been hollowed out with a blunt tool. Aides and reporters from a dozen species crowd the hallway outside, some curious, some indifferent, none of them particularly moved by what just happened. To them, this is simply another Tuesday. To me, it feels like a verdict. I do not cry until I am alone in the small diplomatic shuttle that will carry me back to the transport ship bound for Earth. I sit in the narrow cabin, the data crystal still clenched in my hand, and I let myself feel it, the full weight of what just happened. My planet asked for help, and the galaxy laughed. But somewhere underneath the grief, something else begins to take shape, a cold, clear thought that settles into my mind and refuses to leave. They think we are children throwing a tantrum. They think our history of conflict makes us weak, unworthy, something to be tolerated at best and dismissed at worst. They do not understand what that history actually built in us. Every war, every disaster, every impossible situation we have faced as a species has taught us one thing over and over again. We do not wait for permission to survive. We do not wait for someone else to save us. I look out the small viewport of the shuttle at the distant, swirling lights of 1,000 worlds who just decided my planet was not worth saving. And for the first time since I left the council chamber, I feel something other than grief. I feel resolve. I open a secure channel back to Earth, the connection stretching across an unimaginable distance, carried through relay stations built by species who barely acknowledge we exist. It takes several minutes for the signal to establish. When the response finally comes through, it is the voice of the Secretary General, tired and tense, waiting for news she already suspects. "Elena," she says, "tell me." I take a breath. I think about softening it, about finding some diplomatic way to deliver 30 seconds of dismissal and laughter. But my people deserve the truth, exactly as it happened. They said no, I tell her. They laughed at us. They told us to use this as an opportunity for growth. There is a long silence on the other end of the channel. I can hear, faintly, the sound of a room full of officials waiting for her response, waiting to know whether their species has been given a lifeline or left to drift. "Then we grow," the Secretary General finally says, and there is something new in her voice, something hard and unshaken. "Come home, Elena. We have work to do." I close my eyes and let the shuttle carry me toward the transport ship, toward the long journey back to a small blue planet that the galaxy has just underestimated for the very last time. We were not given help, so we would become something the galaxy could not ignore. 3 days after I return to Earth, an alarm tears through the underground command center outside Geneva at 2 in the morning, and I am on my feet before I even realize I am awake. "Ambassador Voss, you need to see this," says Daniel Marsh, the young systems analyst who has barely slept since my report reached Earth. His face is lit blue by the glow of a dozen monitors, and his hands are shaking slightly as he pulls up a new set of readings. The debris cluster has changed course, not by much, but enough that our scientists, who had given us a full year to prepare, now believe the timeline has been cut to 7 months. I stare at the projection hovering above the central table, a swirling mass of rock and metal and something our instruments cannot fully classify, tumbling closer to home with every passing hour. 7 months to build something the galaxy's oldest civilization said we could not build in a lifetime. "Wake the Secretary General," I say. "Wake everyone." By sunrise, leaders from every major nation on Earth are gathered, in person and through secure channels, in a room that has never held this many world leaders at once, not even during the worst crises of the past century. I watch old rivals sit across from each other in tense silence. I watch representatives from nations that have not spoken directly in decades exchange careful nods. Fear has a strange way of clearing a room of old grudges. I stand at the front of that room and tell them everything. The rejection, the laughter, the new timeline. I do not soften any of it, because softening it now would only cost us time we do not have. When I finish speaking, there is a silence that stretches long enough to feel dangerous. Then a voice cuts through it, calm and steady, belonging to a woman I have not yet met in person, though I recognize her from briefings. Grace Whitfield, head of the newly formed Global Defense Initiative, a program most of us assumed was still years from being operational. "We have something," she says. "It is not finished. It was never meant to be finished this soon. But we have something." She explains what her teams have been quietly developing for the past 6 years, largely hidden from public knowledge, and, until this moment, hidden from most of the room as well. A propulsion system built from theoretical physics that our own researchers pieced together independently, without any help from the wider galaxy, cobbled from decades of stubborn human curiosity and a refusal to accept that faster-than-light travel belonged only to older, wiser species. It is unstable. It is untested at any meaningful scale, but it exists, built in secret shipyards hidden beneath mountain ranges and ocean floors, funded by a coalition of governments who, for once, agreed that some things mattered more than national pride. I feel something shift in my chest as she speaks, something between fear and disbelief, and a strange, fragile kind of hope. We were never as far behind as the Council believed. We were simply quiet about how far we had come. Over the following weeks, I watch my planet transform in ways I never thought possible in my lifetime. Factories that once built cars and aircraft are retooled overnight to manufacture hull plating and reactor components. Software engineers who spent their careers writing code for financial systems and video games are pulled into research teams working around the clock on defense algorithms. Farmers, teachers, mechanics, and soldiers all find themselves connected by a single shared purpose for what feels like the first time in human history. I travel from country to country, coordinating with Grace and her team, helping translate technical requirements into language our fractured governments can agree on. It is exhausting work, filled with arguments over funding, over control, over who gets credit for what, because even facing extinction, humans do not entirely stop being human. But underneath the arguments, something remarkable keeps happening. People keep showing up, keep working, keep building. One evening, exhausted and half asleep at a briefing table in a converted military bunker outside a city I have visited too many times to count this month, I receive a message through a private diplomatic channel I was not expecting to hear from again. The sender identifies herself as Naira Solon, senior aide to Ilvanar delegate Thessaly Kor, the quiet blue-skinned delegate I noticed in the council chamber, the one who did not laugh. The message is short, encrypted, and careful in its wording, the kind of caution that tells me the sender knows exactly how much risk she is taking by sending it at all. Ambassador Voss, it reads, "My delegate wishes to speak with you directly, away from council channels. What you were told about the debris cluster is not complete. There are things the council has chosen not to share." I read the message 3 times before I show it to Grace and the Secretary General. We debate for over an hour whether to respond, whether this could be some kind of trap or manipulation designed to distract us during our most vulnerable window of preparation. But something in the careful phrasing convinces me it is genuine, and more than that, I remember the look on Thessaly Kor's face in the council chamber. Not amusement, not indifference, something closer to concern. I agree to the meeting. It takes place 2 weeks later, through a secure and heavily encrypted relay, my face displayed on a small screen in a private room, while Thessaly Kor appears on the other end, her pale blue features calm, but her eyes carrying a weight I recognize from every human leader I have spoken with these past weeks. "Ambassador Voss," she begins, her translated voice quiet and measured, "I did not vote against your petition. I remember," I tell her, "you were one of 12. There is a reason so few of us understood the true nature of your situation," she says. The debris cluster your scientists detected is not entirely natural in origin. Fragments of it carry construction markings consistent with an old and largely forgotten conflict from centuries before your species developed agriculture. It is, in simple terms, debris from an old weapon platform, long dormant, now drifting and partially reactivated by forces we do not yet fully understand. I feel the floor of my certainty shift beneath me. Why would the Council hide this? Because acknowledging it would require the Council to admit the old conflict was never fully resolved, Thessaly says. It would reopen political tensions between several member species that took centuries to stabilize. It is easier, politically, to let a young, inconvenient species handle the consequences alone and to call it a natural disaster than to reopen old wounds among established powers. I sit in silence for a long moment, absorbing what she has told me. My planet is not simply facing a natural threat. We are facing the forgotten leftovers of someone else's conflict, left to drift toward us because acknowledging the truth would be politically inconvenient for people who have never once had to fear for their own survival. "Why are you telling me this?" I finally ask. Thessaly's expression shifts into something I have not seen from any council delegate before, something close to shame. Because my own grandmother helped negotiate the agreement that ended that ancient conflict. She always said the debris field should have been fully neutralized, not simply abandoned in the outer regions and forgotten. I have spent my career quietly trying to convince the Council to finish what was left undone. No one has listened. Perhaps, Ambassador Voss, your species will succeed where diplomacy has failed. Before I can respond, she adds one final piece of information, delivered carefully, as though she has debated for a long time whether to share it at all. There is a partial deflection protocol from the original conflict era still stored in restricted Council archives. I cannot transmit it to you directly without triggering immediate detection, but I can guide you toward pieces of it disguised as historical research requests if you are willing to be patient and precise. I do not hesitate. Send whatever you can. Over the following months, fragments of ancient data begin arriving through carefully disguised channels, historical archives requested under the guise of academic curiosity, technical schematics buried inside what appear to be routine cultural exchange packages. Our engineers work around the clock, piecing together technology far older and more advanced than anything we could have developed on our own, adapting it, translating it into systems our shipyards can actually build. I return to Earth permanently now, my diplomatic post effectively suspended since the Council has little further interest in our small, dismissed species. I spend my days moving between shipyards and command centers, watching a scattered, stubborn species slowly assemble something the galaxy never thought we were capable of. Grace shows me the first completed prototype vessel on a cold morning in a hidden shipyard built into the side of a mountain range, its hull still rough and unfinished, its systems held together by a combination of adapted alien technology and human improvisation that should not, by any reasonable engineering standard, actually work. "She's rough," Grace says, looking up at the half-finished ship with something between pride and exhaustion. "But she will fly." I look up at that strange, defiant shape rising out of the mountain, built in secret by a species the galaxy laughed out of a council chamber, and I feel that same cold, clear resolve settle back into my chest. 7 months has become 5. The threat is closer and stranger than any of us originally understood. But for the first time since I stood alone in that mocking chamber, I do not feel like the last hope of a dismissed species. I feel like the first spark of something the galaxy has never seen before. A klaxon rips through the shipyard at 4 in the morning, and every engineer on the floor drops what they are holding at once. I am already awake when it happens, sitting in a cramped observation office overlooking the construction bay, reviewing deflection calculations with Daniel Marsh for what feels like the 100th time this week. The alarm is not a drill. We stopped running drills 2 months ago, when the real danger became too constant to distinguish from a rehearsal. "Talk to me," I say, already moving toward the main console. "The cluster split," Daniel says, his voice tight. Part of it changed trajectory 11 hours ago. Our tracking systems only just confirmed it. There is a secondary fragment moving faster than the main mass, and it is not behaving like debris. I stare at the projection above the console, watching a smaller, denser shape peel away from the larger cluster and accelerate on a path of its own. Thessaly Core warned us the debris carried old weapon signatures, but none of us allowed ourselves to fully imagine what that might mean until this exact moment, watching something that should be inert make a decision. It's active, I say quietly. Something in there is still active. Grace arrives within minutes, her hair still damp from being woken out of sleep, her eyes sharp despite the hour. She studies the projection in silence for a long moment before speaking. How long until it reaches Earth's orbit? At current acceleration, Daniel says, 11 weeks. Maybe less. 11 weeks, not 5 months, not even close. Every plan we built, every timeline our engineers worked around, has just been cut down to a fraction of what we thought we had. I do not allow myself to panic, because panic is a luxury none of us can afford anymore. Instead, I do the only thing that has ever worked for our species when the walls close in from every direction at once. I gather the people who can actually solve the problem, and I ask them what we need. Within 6 hours, every shipyard on Earth receives the same emergency directive. Full production, no delays, no perfect solutions, only working ones. Grace's team reroutes every available resource toward finishing the first combat-capable vessels, even if that means launching ships that are, by any careful engineering standard, still unfinished. I spend the following weeks living inside the shipyard itself, sleeping in short bursts on a cot in the observation office, watching a species that the galaxy called too young and too violent to matter build an impossible fleet out of stubbornness and desperation. I meet a young propulsion engineer named Oliver Sinclair during this stretch, a quiet man in his late 20s with permanent grease stains on his hands and an unshakable habit of humming old songs under his breath while he works. I ask him one night, half out of curiosity and half out of exhaustion, how he manages to stay so calm while building an untested engine meant to power our only line of defense. My grandfather used to say something, he tells me, not looking up from the panel he is adjusting. He said humans have never once waited for the perfect tool to fix a problem. We just start fixing it with whatever is in our hands, and we figure out the rest along the way. I think about that conversation more than once in the days that follow, watching engineers, soldiers, and volunteers from every corner of the world solve problems that should, by any reasonable measure, be unsolvable in the time we have left. Thessaly Core continues sending fragments of the old deflection protocol through disguised channels, each piece more valuable than the last, though she warns me repeatedly that her activity is drawing attention within the Council's lower administrative levels. I do not know how much longer I can continue without being noticed, she tells me during one of our late-night exchanges, her voice carrying a tension I have not heard from her before. If the Council discovers what I have shared, the consequences will not be limited to me. Then stop, I tell her, meaning it. We will find another way if we have to. No, she says, and there is something fierce beneath her usually calm exterior. I told you, my grandmother believed this should have been finished long ago. I will not abandon that now, not when your people are finally close to finishing it themselves. 3 weeks before the secondary fragment is projected to reach Earth's orbit, we run our first full combat simulation using the completed deflection protocol combined with our own adapted propulsion systems. I stand in the command center with Grace, Daniel, and a dozen exhausted engineers, watching a simulated version of our fleet attempt to intercept and redirect a modeled version of the incoming threat. The simulation fails, badly. Our ships are fast, faster than anything the Council believed we could build in this short a time, but our targeting systems cannot compensate for the erratic, almost intelligent movement of the secondary fragment. In the simulation, 3/4 of our fleet is lost before any meaningful deflection is achieved. The room falls into a heavy, exhausted silence. We run it again, I say, before anyone can voice the fear I know is sitting in every chest in that room. We adjust, and we run it again. We run it 11 more times that week. Each time, a small percentage improves. Each time, exhausted engineers push their bodies past reasonable limits, refusing to stop, refusing to accept that this might simply be beyond what we can achieve in time. It is Oliver Sinclair, on the 12th attempt, who finally proposes the change that shifts everything. Instead of relying purely on our targeting systems to predict the fragment's movement, he suggests combining human-piloted maneuvering with the automated systems, using instinct and reaction time alongside calculation, something our AI systems alone had never been designed to replicate. It's not elegant, he admits, presenting the modified plan to Grace and the rest of the command staff. But humans have always been good at improvising when the numbers alone don't add up. We test it. The simulated losses drop by more than half. It is not a guarantee. It is not the clean, confident plan any of us wish we had. But for the first time since the alarm tore through the shipyard weeks ago, I allow myself to believe we might actually have a chance. 2 weeks before the fragment's projected arrival, Thessaly Corps sends one final message, shorter and more urgent than any before it. The Council has detected unusual activity connected to my inquiries, it reads. I do not know how much time I have before they act. I am sending you the last piece of the protocol now. Whatever happens to me, do not let this be for nothing. I stare at that message for a long time before I show it to Grace. We do not know what will happen to Thessaly Corps, whether the Council will simply reprimand her or something far worse. But I know one thing with absolute certainty as I watch our fleet, small and scarred and stubbornly assembled, prepare for a battle none of us ever wanted to fight. We will not let it be for nothing. The final ships roll out of the shipyards 8 days before the fragment is expected to reach us, their hulls still bearing the rough, unfinished marks of a species that built an impossible fleet out of nothing but time, sacrifice, and refusal to give up. I stand on the observation deck as the last vessel lifts into the sky, joining the rest of our small, defiant fleet gathering in high orbit, and I think back to that council chamber, to the laughter, to the 30 seconds we were given before being dismissed. They said we were not ready. I look up at our fleet, built in secret, built in desperation, built by a species that refuses to wait for permission to survive, and I know exactly what I would say to that council now, if given the chance. We were never asking if we were ready. We were only ever asking if you would help us prove it. The proximity alarm sounds 40 minutes before the fragment enters Earth's outer defense perimeter, and every screen in the command center turns red at once. I stand beside Grace in the underground command center, watching the tactical display fill with the shapes of our fleet, 43 ships in total, arranged in the formation Oliver Sinclair's team spent the last 2 weeks refining. 43 ships built by a species the galaxy dismissed in 30 seconds, now standing between 6 billion people and a weapon left over from a war none of us started. All vessels report ready, comes the voice of Fleet Commander Laura Bennett, transmitted from the lead ship, a vessel our engineers nicknamed Steadfast, despite its rough, unfinished hull. Awaiting your order, Ambassador. It should not be my order to give. I am a diplomat, not a military commander. But the Secretary General insisted, in the final planning session, that the person who stood in that council chamber and absorbed the galaxy's mockery should be the one to give the order that answers it. I take a breath and think of every person who spent these past months without sleep, without rest, refusing to accept that we were as small and as helpless as the council believed. Engage, I say. The tactical display shifts as our fleet moves into position, spreading into a wide formation designed to intercept the fragment from multiple angles at once, exactly as our simulations suggested would give us the best chance of success. I watch the numbers scroll past, distance closing, velocity climbing, every second bringing our untested fleet closer to a fight none of us can fully predict. The fragment reacts before our ships even reach optimal firing range, shifting course in a sudden, sharp movement that our earlier simulations warned us to expect, but that still sends a jolt of alarm through the command center. It is not simply falling toward Earth. It is maneuvering, adjusting, responding to our approach with a kind of deliberate awareness that confirms every fear Thessaly Core tried to warn us about. "It's targeting the steadfast," Daniel calls out, watching the projected trajectory update in real time. "Laura, break formation, now." Through the command channel, I hear Laura Bennett's voice, steady, despite the danger closing in on her position. "Negative. If I break formation now, the fragment gets a clear path toward the secondary group. Holding position." My chest tightens as I watch the projected paths converge, but I say nothing, because Laura is right, and because interfering now would only put more lives at risk. This is why we spent months training pilots to combine instinct with calculation. This is the moment that training was built for. At the last possible second, Laura executes a maneuver that no automated system in our earlier simulations ever predicted, a sharp, almost reckless turn that pulls the steadfast just outside the fragment's firing arc while simultaneously opening a clear line for the two support vessels flanking her position. "Support vessels, fire," Laura orders. I watch twin streams of energy from our support ships strike the fragment's outer shielding, and for one breathless moment, nothing happens. Then the shielding flickers, destabilizes, and begins to fail exactly as our adapted deflection protocol predicted it would. "Shielding compromised," Daniel confirms, his voice rising with cautious hope. "Deflection window opening in 90 seconds. 90 seconds. An impossibly small window during which our fleet needs to apply enough combined force to redirect the fragment's trajectory away from Earth without destroying it outright, since destroying it entirely risks scattering unpredictable debris across a wider, more dangerous area." "All remaining vessels converge on my mark," Laura calls out. I watch the tactical display fill with the coordinated movement of our fleet, 43 ships built in secret, flying formations that should not be possible for a species so recently dismissed as too primitive for this kind of coordinated defense. Every pilot, every engineer, every exhausted volunteer who spent these past months without rest is represented in that formation, converging on a single, desperate window of opportunity. The fragment reacts again, attempting one final erratic maneuver to break free of the closing formation, and for a terrifying moment, I watch 3 of our ships lose position, drifting dangerously close to the fragment's unstable energy field. "Oliver, can the modified engines handle an emergency correction?" Laura asks, her voice tight but controlled. Oliver Sinclair's voice comes through the channel from his position aboard one of the drifting vessels, steady despite the danger. "They can handle it. Hold on." I watch the 3 drifting ships execute a synchronized burst of speed, engines pushed beyond every safety threshold our engineers originally designed them for, correcting their position with only seconds to spare before the deflection window closes entirely. "Deflection window open," Daniel calls out. 15 seconds. "All vessels, fire on my mark," Laura orders. 3, 2, 1, mark. The tactical display fills with light as every remaining vessel in our fleet fires simultaneously, combined energy striking the fragment's destabilized core exactly as our adapted ancient protocol calculated. For a long, agonizing moment, nothing on the display changes, and I feel the entire command center hold its breath together. Then the fragment's trajectory begins to shift. It is slow at first, barely perceptible, but it grows clearer with each passing second, the projected path bending away from Earth's orbit, curving instead toward a wide, empty stretch of space far beyond any inhabited system. Our combined fleet, small and unfinished and built by hands that had never done this before, has done exactly what the galaxy said was impossible for us to achieve. The command center erupts into a mixture of disbelief and quiet, exhausted relief. I watch Grace close her eyes for a long moment, her shoulders finally relaxing after weeks of carrying a weight I do not think any of us fully understood until this moment. "Fleet status?" I ask, my voice barely steady. 2 vessels lost," Laura reports, and I hear the weight in her voice even through the strain of the channel. "No confirmed casualties. All remaining ships operational." 2 ships. It is not nothing, and I know we will grieve the loss properly once the immediate danger has fully passed. But compared to the devastation this fragment could have brought to Earth, compared to what our earliest simulations predicted, it is a result none of us dared to hope for. I do not know, in this moment, that our success is already being watched far beyond Earth's small solar system. It will be hours before I learn that Thessaly Core, despite the Council's mounting suspicion toward her, found a way to broadcast a live feed of our engagement to select members of the Council chamber, the same chamber that laughed at our plea only months earlier. It will be hours before I learn that the same delegates who mocked us are now watching, in stunned silence, as a species they dismissed as too young and too violent to matter accomplishes something their own combined forces failed to finish centuries ago. But standing in that command center, watching our small, defiant fleet regroup in the quiet aftermath of a battle few of us ever believed we would survive, I do not need to know any of that yet. I only need to know one thing. We did it ourselves. A priority transmission cuts through my sleep less than 6 hours after the fragment's trajectory shifts away from Earth, and the voice on the other end is not one I expect to hear again so soon. Ambassador Voss, Thessaly Core says, her image flickering slightly on the small screen beside my cot in the shipyard's observation office. You need to prepare for a formal council summons. It will arrive within the day. I sit up fully awake now, the exhaustion of the past weeks momentarily forgotten. A summons for what? For everything, she says, and there is something in her voice I have not heard from her before, a kind of careful, exhausted triumph. The engagement was witnessed, not by the full council, not officially, but by enough delegates that the truth cannot be contained any longer. They know what your species accomplished. They know it was done without council assistance, using only fragments of a protocol your people were never meant to have access to. My chest tightens. Are you in danger because of this? I have already been questioned, she admits. But the political situation has shifted faster than I expected. Several delegates who initially voted against your petition are now demanding to know why the council withheld information about the fragment's true origin. The vote that dismissed your species may soon become the council's greatest embarrassment rather than a footnote. The summons arrives precisely as she warned, delivered through official diplomatic channels less than 12 hours later, requesting my immediate return to the council chamber to formally address the events surrounding Earth's engagement with what the summons carefully refers to as an unregistered hazardous object. I do not know what to expect when I step back into that chamber. Part of me still carries the memory of standing there months ago, alone and dismissed within 30 seconds. Laughter echoing off a ceiling built for beings who never once had to fear for their own survival. The chamber is different this time. I notice it the moment I enter, escorted by a small delegation from Earth that includes Grace, Laura Bennett, and at my specific request, Oliver Sinclair, whose quiet insistence on human improvisation shaped the very engagement that brought us here. The usual restless murmur of the chamber is absent. In its place is a heavy, watchful silence, hundreds of alien eyes fixed on our small delegation as we cross the chamber floor. Vorlath, the delegate whose laughter once echoed loudest through this room, does not laugh now. He watches us with an expression I cannot fully read, something between caution and reluctant reassessment. The council chair calls the session to order, and for the first time, I am not asked to plead for anything. I am asked to explain. I do not soften the truth, just as I did not soften it months ago when I returned home with news of our rejection. I describe the fragment's true nature, the ancient weapon signatures Thessaly Core risked her position to reveal to us, the decision by segments of this council to withhold that information rather than confront an old, unresolved conflict. A ripple of unease moves through the chamber as I speak, delegates exchanging glances, some clearly hearing this information for the first time, others shifting uncomfortably as though already anticipating the questions that will follow. Your species accomplished what the combined forces of this council failed to complete centuries ago, the delegate from the Ophir Collective says, her earlier composed tone now carrying something closer to genuine unease. using nothing but fragments of an incomplete protocol and technology, developed independently in a matter of months. How is this possible? I think of every exhausted engineer, every sleepless night in the shipyard, every old rivalry set aside because survival demanded it. I think of Oliver humming quiet songs while adjusting equipment that should not have worked, of Laura's steady voice guiding a fleet through a maneuver no simulation ever predicted. Because we did not have the luxury of centuries, I say, we had months, and when a species is given no other choice but to solve an impossible problem quickly, using whatever tools happen to be in its hands, it finds a way. My people have always solved problems this way, long before we ever left our own world. You called it instability. I call it adaptability. Silence follows my words, stretching long enough that I wonder if I have spoken too plainly for a chamber built on careful diplomatic phrasing. Then, unexpectedly, it is Vorlath who speaks first. The Council owes Earth a formal acknowledgement, he says, and though his translated voice carries none of the warmth a human speaker might use, there is no mockery in it either, only something that sounds, cautiously, like respect. Your petition was dismissed without proper consideration of the facts. That decision endangered your species and nearly allowed old, unresolved conflicts to cause devastating harm to an inhabited world. That quant. The council chair calls for an immediate review of the original vote, and over the following hour, I watch something I never expected to witness in that chamber. Delegate after delegate rises to speak, many of them the very voices who laughed months ago, now acknowledging, with varying degrees of discomfort, that the council's dismissal of Earth's plea was a failure of judgment rather than a reasonable response to an unready species. Thessaly Core is called forward as well, and I watch her stand before the very council she risked everything to challenge, her calm composure returning as she formally testifies to the information she provided and the reasoning behind her decision to share it. I do not know, in that moment, whether the council will punish her for her actions or recognize them for what they truly were. But when the session finally concludes, no formal reprimand is issued against her, only a quiet acknowledgement recorded in the official record that her actions, though unauthorized, prevented catastrophic loss of life. I find her afterward in a quiet corridor outside the chamber, and for the first time since we began exchanging careful, coded messages months ago, I see her without the weight of political caution shadowing her expression. Your grandmother would be proud, I tell her. Thessaly's expression softens into something close to a smile, an expression I did not know her species could make until this moment. She always believed unfinished business eventually finds its way back to demand resolution. I did not expect it would take an entire species of stubborn, impatient humans to finally prove her right. Before the session formally closes, the council chair extends an unprecedented invitation, one that would have seemed impossible only months ago. Earth is offered a permanent seat within the council, not as a dismissed petitioner awaiting approval, but as a recognized member species, granted full standing among governments who once considered us too young and too unstable to matter. I am asked to deliver a final statement before the chamber, and I take a moment before I speak, remembering exactly how it felt to stand in this same space months ago, carrying a plea that was answered with laughter and dismissed within 30 seconds. When my species first came to this chamber, I begin, my voice steady and carrying clearly across the silent hall. We asked for help, and we were told our history of conflict made us unworthy of consideration. I will not stand here and claim that history does not exist, because it does. My people have made mistakes, fought wars, and struggled to find unity even among ourselves. I pause, looking around the chamber at hundreds of species who once dismissed us without a second thought. But that same history taught us something this council apparently forgot. It taught us that survival does not wait for permission. It taught us that unity is often born not from comfort, but from necessity. When you denied our plea, you did not weaken us. You reminded us exactly what we are capable of when no one else is willing to help. I look toward Grace, toward Laura, toward Oliver, toward every member of the small delegation standing beside me, representing a species that built an impossible fleet in months rather than centuries. simply because giving up was never an option we were willing to consider. We do not stand here today asking for your approval, I continue. We stand here because we earned this place ourselves, the same way we have earned everything meaningful throughout our history. If this council chooses to recognize that, we welcome the partnership. But we no longer require your permission to continue existing, growing, or protecting what matters to us. The chamber remained silent for a long moment after I finished speaking, and I do not know, in that instant, whether my words will be received as gratitude or defiance. Then, slowly, delegate after delegate rises from their seats, not in laughter this time, but in something I never expected to witness within these walls. Respect. I returned to Earth 3 days later, carrying with me not a rejection this time, but a formal recognition, a seat at a table that once dismissed us as unworthy of consideration. I think, during the long journey home, of every person who worked without sleep, who set aside old grudges, who built something impossible out of nothing but stubborn determination and a refusal to accept defeat. We were once told we were not ready. We proved, in the end, that readiness was never the question. The only question that ever mattered was whether we would stand up when no one else believed we could. And we did.